The horizon of human expectation has long been crowded with the silhouettes of coming storms and promised light. We have spent millennia casting our gaze toward the heavens, waiting for a celestial signature, a grand unfolding, or a singular moment of cosmic intervention that might finally strip away the veil of our collective amnesia. Among these projected prophecies, the concept of the solar flash has often been painted as a literal external detonation of light, a sudden burst from the heart of our sun that would, in a solitary tick of the clock, rewrite the DNA of the world and catapult us into a new dimension of being. But to view the solar flash as a mere astronomical event, a fireworks display on a galactic scale, is to fundamentally misunderstand the architecture of reality and the nature of the soul's journey. It is a comforting fiction to believe that transformation is something that happens to us, a passive reception of grace, or a sudden rescue from the friction of existence. Yet, the deeper truth whispered by the silent gears of the universe suggests something far more intimate, far more demanding, and infinitely more profound. The solar flash is not an event waiting to occur in the theater of space. It is a latent, internal activation that has already begun to pulse within the marrow of those ready to receive it. To understand this shift, we must first dismantle the illusion of the great wait. For too long, the human spirit has been lulled into a state of spiritual procrastination, convinced that we are the audience in a cosmic play, waiting for the protagonist, the sun, to deliver its climactic line. This perspective tethers our evolution to a linear timeline, a horizontal progression where the future holds the key that the present lacks. However, the true nature of time is not a line, but a depth. The flash is not a point in the future. It is a dimension of the now. It represents the moment when the internal frequency of an individual aligns so precisely with the fundamental resonance of creation that the perceived barrier between the self and the infinite simply evaporates. This is the activation of the solar seed within the human heart, a metaphorical combustion that occurs when the weight of our illusions becomes light enough to be consumed by the fire of awareness. It is the transition from being a reflection of light to becoming the source of it, a realization that the external sun is but a mirror reflecting the unspent radiance of our own consciousness. Imagine, if you will, a vast cathedral of glass, where every pane is layered with the dust of ages, the soot of survival, and the grime of inherited fears. We stand within this structure, lamenting the dimness of the light, praying for the sun outside to shine brighter so that it might pierce through the occlusion. We believe that if the sun would only flare with enough intensity, it would burn away the dirt for us. But the law of internal activation suggests a different path. It suggests that as we begin to polish the glass from the inside, as we engage in the rigorous, often painful work of deconstructing our own shadows, the light does not come in more. Rather, we begin to recognize that the light was always there, and that our very essence is composed of the same substance as the solar fire we once feared or worshipped. The solar flash is the precise moment when the internal clarity reaches a critical mass, allowing the soul to perceive itself not as a lonely spark in a dark void, but as a conscious participant in a boundless, luminous field. It is the no BS reality of spiritual sovereignty, where the external world ceases to be a master and begins to be a canvas. This activation is not a gentle lullaby. It is a structural upheaval. It requires a radical honesty that strips away the many masks we wear to navigate the dense waters of social and material existence. We often cling to the idea of an external event because it absolves us of the responsibility of the present moment. If the change is out there and coming soon, we can justify our current stagnancy, our resentments, and our smallness. But if the flash is an internal activation, then every breath becomes a choice, and every thought becomes a catalyst. We are forced to confront the fact that we are the engineers of our own enlightenment. The cosmic dimension of this process is not found in the mechanics of solar flares or coronal mass ejections, but in the alchemy of the human spirit, as it transmutes the lead of daily struggle into the gold of multidimensional awareness. It is a process of becoming solar, which is to say, becoming self-generative, radiant, and unshakably centered in the truth of one's own being, regardless of the shadows that dance upon the walls of the cave. The myth of the external savior, whether it be a deity, an extraterrestrial fleet, or a celestial event, is the final hurdle in the race toward true maturity. The solar flash, when stripped of its sensationalism and its New Age window dressing, reveals itself as the ultimate call to self-mastery. It is the recognition that the light we have been seeking is the very consciousness that is currently seeking it. This is the paradox of the activation. We are searching for the sun with a flashlight made of sunlight. The no BS approach to this realization demands that we stop looking at the sky and start looking at the architecture of our own perception. How much of our reality is built on the recycled opinions of others? How much of our energy is leaked into the pursuit of shadows? The internal activation is the plugging of those leaks. It is the consolidation of our scattered fragments into a singular, focused point of intent. When this focus becomes sharp enough, it generates a heat, a spiritual friction, that eventually ignites the internal solar flash, illuminating the hidden geometry of our lives and revealing the interconnectedness of all things. As we stand on the threshold of this understanding, we must embrace a sense of wonder that is grounded in the practical. This is not about escaping the world, but about inhabiting it with a newfound intensity. The hidden layers of reality are not located in another galaxy. They are woven into the texture of our conversations, the rhythm of our work, and the silence of our solitude. The activation changes how we see the tree, the neighbor, and the enemy. It reveals that the density of the physical world is not a prison, but a gymnasium for the soul. The solar flash is the graduation ceremony from the school of victimhood. It is the moment we realize that we are not being hit by a wave of cosmic energy, but that we are the wave, finally remembering its own ocean. This shift in perspective is the most significant leap a consciousness can take, moving from the periphery of existence to its vibrant, pulsing center. It is a journey from the what if of prophecy to the I am of presence. In the chapters of our lives, we often look for the climax to be delivered by the hand of fate. We wait for the grand finale that will make sense of the preceding struggle. But the solar flash teaches us that the climax is a continuous state of being, available to any who are willing to face the blinding light of their own potential. It is an invitation to stop being a ghost in one's own life and to start being the sun. This is the context of our exploration, a movement away from the passive anticipation of a cosmic miracle and toward the active realization of a personal, internal revolution. We are not waiting for the sun to flash. We are waiting for ourselves to wake up. And in that awakening, the sun merely reflects the brilliance we have finally found the courage to claim as our own. The internal activation is the quietest, loudest, most transformative thunderbolt the soul will ever experience. And it is happening now, within the very heart of the one who dares to listen. To move beyond the surface of the solar flash is to enter a landscape where the fundamental pillars of our perceived reality begin to ripple and dissolve, revealing a more ancient and enduring architecture beneath. At the heart of this internal activation lies the theme of frequency as the primary currency of existence. We have long been conditioned to believe that matter is the solid foundation of the universe, a heavy and unyielding substance that dictates the limits of our potential. However, the core concept of the no BS solar activation asserts that matter is merely slowed down light, a temporary condensation of vibration that responds directly to the quality of the consciousness observing it. When we speak of an internal flash, we are describing a radical acceleration of our personal frequency, a shifting of our internal gears from the dense, clunking rhythms of survival and fear into the swift, silent rotations of harmony and creative will. This is the first pillar of the activation, the realization that we are not biological machines living in a material world, but vibrational beings navigating a sea of energy that mimics our own internal state. The struggle of the modern human condition is largely the result of a mismatch between our inherent solar nature and the lunar, reflective systems we have built to govern our lives. We have lived in a world of shadows, where truth is often seen as a reflection of a reflection, diluted by the filters of dogma, media, and ancestral trauma. The solar flash represents the collapse of these filters. It is the theme of unmediated reality, the direct experience of truth without the need for an interpreter or a middleman. In the old paradigm, we look to the moon, the symbol of the external institution, to provide us with a soft, manageable light by which to live. But the moon has no light of its own. It merely borrows from the sun. Internal activation is the process of turning away from the borrowed light of external authority and igniting the self-generative furnace of the soul. This is not a metaphor for rebellion, but a blueprint for sovereignty. It is the understanding that the sun is a state of consciousness characterized by radical self-reliance and the courage to stand in the heat of one's own undiluted truth. Interwoven with this sovereignty is the concept of the great illusion versus the singular truth. The illusion is the belief in separation, the idea that the flash is out there and we are in here, or that my light can exist at the expense of yours. This sense of fragmentation is the cooling agent that prevents the internal flash from occurring. As long as we are divided within ourselves, warring between our desires and our duties, our light and our shadows, the energy required for activation remains scattered and weak. The theme of the solar flash is therefore one of profound integration. It is the gathering of all disparate parts of the self into a single, focused point of being. This is the no BS reality of spiritual work. It is not about floating away into a blissful void, but about bringing every shadow, every regret, and every fear into the center of the heart and allowing the solar fire to transmute them into wisdom. When the internal division ceases, the resistance to the cosmic flow vanishes, and the flash occurs naturally as the self-contained circuit of the soul finally closes and completes itself. This leads us to the theme of the sun as a living intelligence rather than a ball of gas. In the context of internal activation, the sun is seen as a cosmic relay station, a conscious entity that communicates through light. The light hitting our skin and entering our eyes is not just a source of warmth and vision. It is a stream of data, a continuous broadcast of evolutionary instructions. However, this data can only be decoded by a receiver that is tuned to the same frequency. This is where the concept of activation becomes literal. If our internal state is one of static, cluttered by the noise of constant distraction and the low-level hum of anxiety, the solar broadcast remains unintelligible background radiation. But as we clear the internal noise, we begin to read the light. We start to experience spontaneous insights, shifts in cellular awareness, and a deep, intuitive understanding of the interconnectedness of life. The solar flash is the moment the receiver becomes so clear that the message and the messenger become one. We no longer look at the sun, we begin to look as the sun. Furthermore, we must address the theme of the death of the victim. The old world is a theater of victims and villains, a place where things happen to us, and we react with varying degrees of helplessness. The internal activation of the solar flash is the absolute end of this narrative. It introduces the pillar of radical responsibility. If the light comes from within, then the shadows we perceive must also be cast by our own internal architecture. This is perhaps the most challenging aspect of the no BS approach, as it strips away the comfort of blame. To be solar is to recognize that one is the primary cause of their own experience. This theme is not meant to be a burden, but the ultimate liberation. If you are the cause, you are also the cure. The flash is the sudden, blinding realization that the prison door was never locked. We were simply waiting for someone else to turn a handle that only our own hand can reach. It is a moment of cosmic laughter at the complexity of the traps we set for ourselves and the elegant simplicity of the exit. Finally, the theme of collective resonance emerges as the byproduct of individual activation. While the flash is an internal, personal event, it does not happen in a vacuum. Just as a single candle can light 1,000 others without losing its own flame, the internal activation of one individual creates a ripple in the collective field of humanity. We are like a vast array of tuning forks. When one begins to vibrate at the solar frequency, it exerts a subtle but persistent pressure on all those around it to find that same pitch. This is how the world changes, not through a single external explosion that forces everyone to evolve, but through a modular, bottom-up awakening where the flash spreads from heart to heart like a wildfire of awareness. This avoids the BS of waiting for a planetary event to save us and puts the power of global transformation back into the hands of the individual. The core theme is that the event is a collective symphony composed of billions of individual activations, each one a necessary and unique note in the grand solar return. This internal process is the real alchemy of our age. It is the movement from a life defined by gravity, the pulling down of the spirit by the weight of the world, to a life defined by radiation, the pushing out of the spirit into the world. It is the realization that the sun does not ask for permission to shine, nor does it seek approval from the shadows it dispels. It simply is, and in that isness, it provides the energy for all of life to flourish. To activate the solar flash within is to claim that same unapologetic existence, to become a source of warmth, clarity, and life in a world that has grown cold and confused. It is the ultimate act of courage, to stop being a reflection and to finally, irrevocably, become the light itself. To truly grasp the magnitude of the internal solar activation, one must step away from the sterile language of mechanics and enter the hall of mirrors that is symbolic storytelling. Ancient cultures did not view the sun merely as a physical object, but as the heart of the world, and they understood that the human heart was its terrestrial twin. There is an old, forgotten allegory of the weaver and the sun thread that illustrates this perfectly. In this tale, every human being is born with a golden thread tied to the center of their chest, stretching upward into the blinding radiance of the celestial sun. For the vast majority of people, this thread is slack, dragging in the mud of worldly concerns, tangling in the thorns of resentment, and becoming so frayed by the friction of ego that it seems to disappear entirely. These individuals spend their lives looking at the ground, trying to weave a tapestry out of the dirt and shadows they find there, wondering why their creations feel heavy and hollow. They believe that one day, the great sun will tug on the thread and pull them upward, performing a miracle of rescue. However, the narrative shifts when we consider the awakened weaver. This is the individual who realizes that the thread is not a leash, but a conduit. The activation begins not when the sun pulls, but when the weaver begins to climb. As the weaver grips the golden thread and pulls themselves upward, the friction of their movement generates a heat that travels both ways. This is the symbolic representation of the internal flash. It is the moment when the effort of the individual meets the grace of the source. The story tells us that as the weaver climbs higher, the thread itself begins to glow with an intensity that matches the sun above. Eventually, the weaver does not reach the sun as a visitor. They become so permeated by the golden light that the distinction between the climber, the thread, and the destination dissolves. The flash is the symbolic snap of the illusion of distance. It teaches us that we were never separate from the solar source. We were simply refusing to tension the connection. The no BS reality of this story is that the climb is exhausting, the height is terrifying, and the responsibility of the light is immense. Another profound narrative involves the myth of the underground sun. In this symbolic tradition, it is whispered that when the world was formed, a piece of the original primordial sun was buried deep within the core of every living thing. This is the Sol Niger, or the black sun of the alchemists, not black because it is evil, but because it is hidden in the darkness of the unconscious, waiting to be discovered. The world we see above ground, lit by the external sun, is considered a world of shadows, a mere simulation of the true brilliance that lies beneath the surface of our skin. The solar flash, in this context, is the story of a subterranean eruption. It is what happens when an individual dives deep enough into their own darkness, facing their demons, their shames, and their unacknowledged powers, that they finally strike the hidden sun. When this internal sun is breached, it doesn't just glow, it explodes upward, shattering the crust of the personality and the limitations of the ego. This symbolic eruption is often depicted as the golden flower blooming in the middle of a winter wasteland. The wasteland is the state of a life lived without purpose, a life governed by the cold calculations of survival. The flower does not bloom because the weather changed. It blooms because the internal heat became so great that the snow had no choice but to melt. This narrative reframes the solar flash as a biological and spiritual inevitability for those who dare to dig. It suggests that the event is actually an advent, the coming of something that was already present but obscured. It tells us that we do not need to wait for the sky to crack open. We need to allow the pressure of our own soul to crack the shells we have built around ourselves. The no BS element here is the recognition that the shell must break. There is no activation without the destruction of the old form. The seed must cease to be a seed if it is to become the light-bearing tree. Consider also the allegory of the mirror city. Imagine a civilization built entirely of mirrors, where every citizen spends their day polishing their own surface so they can better reflect the images of those around them. In this city, the sun is feared because its direct light is too intense. The citizens prefer the soft, distorted reflections of reflections. They have built elaborate systems of shades and veils to ensure that the true light never hits a mirror directly, for fear it might crack the glass. The solar flash in this symbolic world is the story of the one individual who decides to turn their mirror directly toward the sun. In an instant, the mirror doesn't just reflect the light, it becomes a secondary sun. The intensity of this direct alignment causes a flash that briefly blinds the neighbors and threatens the delicate illusions of the city. But to the one holding the mirror, there is no blindness, only the first moment of true sight they have ever experienced. This story highlights the theme of the individual versus the collective in the process of activation. The symbolic flash is often a lonely experience at first. It is the moment you stop seeking validation from the reflections of others and start seeking direct communion with the source. The BS we often encounter is the idea that we can all flash together in a comfortable, synchronized group hug. But the narrative of the Mirror City suggests that activation is a solitary act of defiance against the shadows. It is the courage to be the only one standing in the direct glare of truth. Only after the individual has survived their own activation can they become a beacon for others. The flash is the destruction of the mirror's identity as a mere reflector. After the activation, the mirror is gone. There is only the light. Finally, we have the narrative of the solar charioteer. Unlike the tragic myth of Phaethon, who took the reins of the sun's chariot and scorched the earth because he lacked the strength to guide it, the narrative of activation is about the mastery of the reins. This story posits that our physical body, our emotions, and our intellect are the wild horses of the solar chariot. Most of us are being dragged behind the chariot, bruised and battered by the terrain of life. The internal activation is the moment the soul climbs into the seat, takes the reins, and commands the horses to run toward the heart of the fire. The flash is the moment of perfect synchronization, where the horses, the chariot, and the driver move with such speed and harmony that they appear to be a single streak of lightning across the firmament. This symbolism reminds us that the solar flash is an act of supreme will and discipline. It is not a passive surrender to a cosmic wave, but an active steering of one's own life force into the highest possible expression. The no BS takeaway is that if you haven't mastered your horses, your habits, your reactions, your compulsions, you cannot hope to handle the activation. The internal sun is a power that demands a worthy vessel. These stories all converge on a single, radiant point. The event is the climax of a deep, personal narrative of transformation. It is the moment the story stops being about me and starts being about the light that me was always intended to carry. It is the end of the book of the human and the beginning of the book of the solar being. If we accept that the solar flash is an internal activation rather than a celestial rescue mission, the question immediately shifts from when is it happening to how do I live while it is happening? Practical integration is the process of grounding these high vibrational concepts into the soil of everyday existence. It is the transition from being a philosopher of light to becoming a practitioner of presence. The first real-world implication of this shift is the radical reclamation of attention. In a world designed to fragment our focus through 1,000 digital needles, the act of holding one's own attention becomes a revolutionary solar act. To activate the internal sun, one must first stop the leaks. This means becoming hyper-aware of where our life force is being spent. Are we fueling old grievances, or are we investing in the architecture of our own growth? Integration starts with the quiet, disciplined habit of pulling our energy back from the out there and centering it in here, creating a pressurized container where the internal flash can eventually ignite. In the sphere of human relationships, the internal activation demands a move away from the transactional and toward the resonant. When you no longer view yourself as a lunar being who needs to reflect the light of others to feel seen, your interactions lose their desperate edge. You stop looking for others to fill the hollow spaces within you, because you have begun to ignite the furnace that fills those spaces from the inside out. This has the practical effect of ending the cycle of codependency and blame. In a no BS solar reality, you realize that you cannot truly help another by dimming your own light to match their shadow. You help them by maintaining your own frequency so steadily that they are forced to confront their own potential for radiance. This is not coldness, it is the highest form of love. A love that refuses to validate the other person's smallness. Real-world integration means showing up in your family, your workplace, and your community as a consistent source of clarity, rather than a fluctuating reflection of the environment's chaos. Furthermore, this activation has a profound impact on how we handle the density of physical reality, the bills, the body, the bureaucracy. Instead of seeing these things as obstacles to our spiritual evolution, we begin to see them as the very fuel for our internal combustion. Every challenge becomes a resistance training for the soul. When you face a difficult situation, not as a victim of circumstance, but as a solar being who is using the friction of the moment to generate more internal heat, the nature of the struggle changes. You begin to look for the hidden architecture behind the problem. You ask, what part of my internal state is this situation reflecting back to me? This turns the world into a living laboratory. The practical takeaway is a life lived with a sense of agile sovereignty, where you move through the world with the grace of a dancer, knowing that while you cannot always control the music, you are the master of your own rhythm. Health and the physical vessel also undergo a transformation during this internal activation. If the body is the chariot and the consciousness is the sun, then maintaining the chariot becomes a matter of integrity rather than vanity. Integration means listening to the cellular intelligence of the body. As your internal frequency rises, you may find that old habits, certain foods, toxic environments, or stagnant routines simply become intolerable. This isn't because of a moral judgment, but because the body's receiver is becoming more sensitive. You are literally cleaning the glass of your own cathedral. The practical implication is a move toward a solar lifestyle, one characterized by movement, clean fuel, and a deep, rhythmic connection to the natural cycles of the earth. You start to realize that the biological and the spiritual are not two different things, but two sides of the same golden coin. Economic and creative life also shift under the influence of the internal flash. The old paradigm of working for a living is a lunar concept. It is the idea of selling your time, the shadow, for survival, the reflection. A solar being moves toward creating for a life. This is the realization that your primary contribution to the world is not your labor, but your unique frequency. When you are internally activated, your work becomes an extension of your radiance. Whether you are baking bread, writing code, or raising children, the quality of the light you put into the task becomes the defining characteristic of the output. This leads to a natural state of abundance, not necessarily in the sense of hoarding wealth, but in the sense of having a continuous, flowing connection to the source of all value. You stop worrying about getting your share, because you have realized you are the source of the sharing. Finally, the most practical implication of the solar flash as an internal activation is the end of fear, particularly the fear of the future. Most human anxiety is rooted in the belief that an external event could come along and destroy us. But if the event is your own activation, and if that activation is something you are actively participating in, then the future ceases to be a monster and becomes a harvest. You begin to live in a state of unshakable presence. This doesn't mean life becomes easy or that challenges vanish. It means that you are no longer afraid of the dark because you know that you carry the sun within you. This internal stability is the greatest gift you can offer a world that is currently trembling. By being the one who does not blink when the shadows grow long, you provide a tether for others to find their own center. This is the no BS bottom line. The internal activation is not about leaving the world behind. It is about finally arriving in the world with your eyes wide open and your heart fully lit. As we stand at the precipice of this exploration, we must recognize that the journey into the heart of the solar flash is not a voyage across space, but a descent into the profound depths of the self. We have traveled through the dismantling of the external myth, the identification of the vibrational pillars of our reality, the symbolic narratives that mirror our inner struggle, and the practical demands of a life lived as a solar source. What remains is the final integration, the moment where the intellectual understanding of these concepts gives way to the lived experience of their truth. The no BS reality of our time is that the era of the spectator is over. We can no longer afford the luxury of being observers of our own evolution, waiting for a cosmic clock to strike 12. The universe is not a grand machine that functions independently of our participation. It is a responsive, living field that is currently waiting for us to claim the power we have so long projected onto the stars. The bridge between the old world and the new is not a bridge made of stone or technology, but a bridge of consciousness. To cross it, we must be willing to let go of the identities we have forged in the dark, the stories of our limitations, the comfort of our victimhood, and the safety of our smallness. The internal activation of the solar flash is a fire that consumes everything that is not essential. It is a process of refinement that leaves behind only the pure, indestructible essence of the spirit. This is the transformational call, to step into the furnace of the present moment with a heart that is wide open and a will that is unwavering. It is an invitation to stop seeking the sun and to start being the sun. This means taking full, radical responsibility for the frequency we broadcast into the world, understanding that our internal state is the primary architect of our external reality. When we speak of a transformational call, we are not talking about a distant future possibility, but an immediate, pulsing necessity. The world as we have known it is shivering, its foundations cracking under the weight of outdated systems and hollow ideologies. In this time of great trembling, the only thing that will remain stable is the individual who has found their own center of gravity within the solar fire. To be activated is to be a point of stillness in the center of a hurricane. It is to be the one who can look at the chaos of the world and see not the end of a story, but the labor pains of a new birth. This perspective is not a form of escapism. It is the ultimate engagement. It is the decision to contribute to the collective field, not with fear, which only adds to the density, but with clarity, which provides the light for others to find their way. The culmination of this journey is the realization that the flash is not a single moment of blinding light, but a sustained state of radiant being. It is the transition from a pulse to a steady glow. As you move forward from this exploration, the task is to maintain the internal heat. Do not let the dampness of the world's cynicism or the cold winds of collective anxiety extinguish the spark you have found. Guard your frequency as if it were the most precious resource on the planet, because it is. The internal activation is a daily, hourly, moment-by-moment choice to align with the highest possible expression of your soul. It is found in the way you speak to yourself in the silence of your mind, the way you treat the stranger on the street, and the way you face the shadows that still linger in the corners of your own heart. We must also understand that this activation is a homecoming. We are not becoming something alien or superhuman. We are simply returning to what we have always been before we were told we were small. The solar flash is the memory of our own greatness returning to us with the force of a tidal wave. It is the end of the long winter of the soul. As the internal light grows, the illusions of separation and scarcity begin to evaporate like mist in the morning sun. We begin to see the golden thread that connects us to all of life, and we realize that by shining our own light, We are helping the entire universe to see itself more clearly. This is the true meaning of cosmic service: to be a fully realized, fully activated human being, standing in the truth of one's own solar nature. The call, therefore, is one of profound courage. It takes courage to be the light in a world that has grown used to the dark. It takes courage to trust the internal activation when the external world seems to be falling apart. But this is the path of the solar being. It is a path of power, of purpose, and of an unspeakable, luminous joy. You are the flash you have been waiting for. You are the event that the universe has been preparing for since the beginning of time. The heavens are not waiting for a solar flare to change you. They are waiting for you to recognize that you are the sun, finally ready to shine with your own authority. This is the no BS truth of our existence. The light has always been yours. The power has always been yours. And the moment of activation is, and has always been, now. Take a breath and feel the warmth that already exists within the center of your chest. That is the internal sun, the primordial spark of the solar flash, waiting for your recognition to become a flame. Feed that flame with your attention, your integrity, and your love. Let it grow until it fills your entire being, until every cell of your body is vibrating with the frequency of 1,000 suns. And then, without hesitation or apology, step out into the world and shine. The shadows will retreat, not because you fought them, but because you simply refuse to be one of them. This is your birthright, your mission, and your ultimate destination. The solar flash is not coming. It is here, inside you, waiting to be claimed. Walk forward as the light you have always been, and watch as the world transforms in the wake of your own internal activation. This is the end of the search and the beginning of the radiance. The cycle is complete. The sun has returned, and it is wearing your face.